In this video today, I'm going to share with you everything that you need to know about propagating a cactus from a cutting. About 2 months ago, disaster struck in the greenhouse, and this fantastic Cleistocactus plagiostoma got a little bit top heavy, couldn't support its own weight, and I came out here one day to find that the whole thing had just collapsed. End result is I've got 3 chunks of what was a beautiful cactus. But every cloud has a silver lining, and now we're going to turn those 3 chunks into 3 new plants. So strap yourselves in and let's explore the wonderful world of asexual reproduction in cacti. What do we actually need to successfully take our cutting? Well, first of all, safety is paramount. We don't want to get spines stuck into our fingers, so good thick gloves or any other instrument that you might prefer to avoid bloody hands. Now, depending on the size of the cut that we're taking, that's going to affect the size of the blade that we need. These Cleistocactus cuts were pretty thick, so I've opted for a sawtooth blade, just allowing me to saw straight through the tissue. If you're dealing with something a little bit more manageable, you can get away with a kitchen knife, hopefully something a little cleaner than this one. Or if you're taking a very fine cutting, scissors can even do the trick. Now, you're going to want something to sterilize your equipment before taking the cutting. Isopropyl alcohol is a good option. And in some instances, after you take the cutting, you might want to make sure that you've got a barrier against fungus, which can be provided by horticultural sulfur. Now, you're going to need a pot, that goes without saying if you want this thing to take root. And the last thing you're going to need is a really good gritty soil medium. In this case, I'm using straight pumice, big chunky bits of pumice, which lets a lot of air in. I'll explain why later. Once you've got those things, you're all set. Let's look at the process. Now, in my case, I didn't really have to take the cutting, but these guys were pretty mangled when I found them, and so I gave them a tidy up with the sawtooth blade. If you're taking a cutting straight off the mother plant though, you're just going to want to essentially find an appropriate place as close to the body of the plant as you can and take it down. Pretty straightforward stuff. Now, importantly, once you've got your cut, the next steps are going to be crucial to success. What you're going to want to do is find a cool, dry place and leave your cut there for probably weeks, if not months, to callus over. You can see this guy's been sitting just at the back of the greenhouse here, completely dry for 2 months essentially, and it's developed a nice, really thick callus. Now, a callus is essentially a form of scar tissue, and what that's going to do is prevent any pathogens like fungus or bacteria getting into our cut and causing it to rot, which really isn't ideal. Now, I didn't use anything to treat the cut, but if you live somewhere that's a bit more humid, or perhaps you just want to be extra cautious, this is where our horticultural sulfur can come in. And you just take your cut. I'm doing this after the fact just to illustrate, but you take your cut, give it a liberal dosing of this nice yellow powder, and that will effectively create a barrier and fight off any of those potential pathogens. So you set it aside, just let it dry out. Depending on the size of the plant and the cutting that you've taken, can really impact how long you can leave it for. Like I said, these are pretty big chunks of plant. They're not going to dehydrate and die. But if you've got a smaller cutting, if you've taken something quite small and you're somewhere quite dry and warm, well, there is a potential that the plant itself could dehydrate, which might affect your chances of success later on. So just keep an eye on it, and if you notice it shrinking to any real significant extent, might be time to chuck it in some soil. And that's exactly what we're going to do next. There's no point taking a cutting if it's not going to grow roots. How do we stimulate roots? Well, we've got a few different options. Some people will advocate the use of a product like Clonex, which is essentially a hormone stimulant product. They believe that it'll get the plant to shoot out roots, and that's absolutely the case in especially very woody plants. But cacti and succulents they're already pretty well primed to put out roots without any sort of chemical stimulant to assist. And so I'm not going to bother today. What we're going to do though, is we're going to take our pot, an appropriate size for our cutting. Picking up these things without gloves, not a great idea. You can see, great size pot. And what we're going to do is we're going to load this up with pumice. We're going to load it up to about 2/3 full. So here we go. Why pumice? Well, pumice is a fantastic airy medium, and that's really what you want. I'm going to try and avoid using any sort of organics in this process because we're not trying to give the plant nutrients. All we're trying to do is stimulate root growth, and once those roots are out, then we can transfer it into a better potting soil and start stimulating growth itself. So I'm going to load this up with pumice and we'll come back in just a moment. Our pot is primed and ready to go. So, taking our cut carefully, going to just place it on top of the pumice in there. I'm going to backfill it now, just around the base of the plant. The idea here essentially is to give the plant a bit of stability. We don't want it toppling over while it's trying to send out roots. So that now is done, as you can see. Now, why do plants put out roots? Well, really it's about their metabolism, and what we want to do now is stimulate this plant's metabolism. You'll see a lot of people saying, don't give the plant water until it's got roots. It has no way of uptaking that water. It's a load of rubbish. What we want to do to stimulate that metabolism is to create an environment that makes it want to grow. And the first thing we can do is to provide it with heat. This is a summer growing plant, so if it's got a bit of warmth, it's going to be inclined to start growing, and bit of humidity, especially humidity around the base. That's where it's going to send out roots. So it's in pure pumice. Fantastic. What that means is that we can water this maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks. It doesn't have to be too often, but that's creating that humidity around the base. And because the pumice is nice and airy, there's a lot of space around each of those particular grains, there's no real chance of rot. This plant isn't being waterlogged in any sense. All we're doing is giving it a gentle nudge in the direction of putting out roots. Now, if it's summer where you are, all the better. Just find a nice, warm, out of direct sun position. Put this little guy, and within maybe a few weeks, a month, you might start noticing the very beginning of roots. If it's winter, like it is right here, I'm going to put this on a heat mat, and that's going to be my source of heat. Now, one thing to be wary of course, is that you plant your cuts the right way. If we're looking at a mid-cut like this, you might be looking at it going, oh, bugger, forgotten which way it goes into the soil. Well, be guided by the spines. All species will have a spination pattern. And in this case, if I'm looking at the top here, I can see that there are large primary spines at the top of each areole and a series of smaller spines at the bottom. And that gives me a pretty good hint when looking at this mid-cut that this is the right way up. So I'm going to repeat the same process now for this mid-cut, and we'll get a couple of new plants going. Now there is of course always the alternative. If you're completely stuffed, lie it down on the soil like this, and it will send roots out from whatever's in contact with the soil, and you'll get new shoots coming up the top. Worth considering. I'll get into it right now. Now, how do we know when it's got roots and it's time to start thinking about transplanting? Well, all you want to do is give your plant a very gentle little tug, and if there's any give there, it's worth keeping it in the pot. These guys, unsurprisingly, don't have roots. I'm not a miracle worker, but I do have a plant which I used this process on about 3 months ago. This is a Trichocereus hybrid called Vishnu. Has the most amazing flowers, and because it's a cultivar, it's only available as cuts. If you got it from seed, it wouldn't stay true to type. Now, this has been sitting in pumice on a heat mat, like I said, getting occasional waterings. And when I give it a gentle tug, I can see that it's kind of bringing up the soil a little bit. I'm going to take it out of its pot now and see the state of its roots. And hopefully I'm not going to embarrass myself by showing you that this method doesn't work. Here we go. Oh, very spiky little guy. All right, look at that. Fantastic. You can see midwinter, we've got fantastic root growth through that pumice. This plant now is going to go into a nice, happy soil mix. Outstanding. And so that, essentially, is everything you need to know. Once you put it into a soil mix, you can start treating it like any other cactus in your collection. Pretty straightforward. Now, if you can't get your hands on pumice, that's okay. There are all sorts of other gritty, inorganic medias that are just as good. Perlite will do in a pinch, or zeolite, or any other of those real kind of chunky, gritty, inorganic substances that get mixed into a soil. All you want to do is avoid waterlogging the plant. So, that's it for today. If you've got any questions, please hit me up. You know, find me on Instagram at bayou.brothers and go out and cut your plants to pieces and have fun with it. I'll catch you next time. Happy growing.